Moscow is reeling under pressure as Ukrainian forces continue their ferocious assault into Russian territory, pushing the battlefront into its 7th day. The big question is, how long can Ukraine continue to wage its offensive inside Russian territory? Let's find out in this next report.
For 7 relentless days, the unthinkable has unfolded on Russian soil. Ukrainian forces, once thought to be on the defensive, have carved a 30-kilometer deep gash into Russia's underbelly. This audacious move has left Moscow reeling, its aura of invincibility shattered. Ukrainian soldiers brazenly removed Russian flags from government buildings in captured villages, filmed themselves raising their blue and yellow flag and taunting the Russians.
Dear Ukrainians, we went into a Pitarochka. I went inside and I'm telling you, the selection is poor. The pickings are slim. ATB is better.
Caught off guard, Moscow is scrambling to stabilize the front lines in the Kursk region. But the relentless Ukrainian offensive has carved out a strategic foothold on Russian soil. Despite Russian claims of repelling multiple Ukrainian attacks in at least 8 different locations, the incursion has exposed significant vulnerabilities in Russian defenses. Both Russia and Ukraine traded accusations over a fire at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, though no elevated radiation levels were reported. President Vladimir Putin, while acknowledging the incursion, vows that Ukraine's effort to destabilize Russia would fail.
Such actions, of course, pursue the main military goal, namely to stop the offensive of our troops to completely liberate the territory of Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, the territory of Novorossiya, and so. What's happening on the battle lines? What are the results? The pace of offensive operations by the Russian armed forces, volunteers and veterans has not only slowed down, but on the contrary sped up by 1 to 5 times.
Until now, Ukraine's military operations inside Russia had been limited to drone and missile strikes. Until now, Ukraine's military operations inside Russia had been limited to drone and missile strikes. But this ground incursion represents a bold escalation aimed at shifting the balance of power. The attack could also be a strategic move to divert Russian military resources. The timing is no coincidence. With the US elections looming, this offensive could be Ukraine's play for leverage in future peace talks. It's a high-risk gambit, but one that's paying dividends in morale at the moment. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Dmitry Babich is a political analyst, Russian international news agency Sputnik. He is now joining us live from Moscow. Welcome, Mr. Babich. Do you think Kursk will be a defining flashpoint in this war? Because it seems like all hands are on deck from both Russia and Ukraine, and the battle has been going on for 7 days now.
Well, the correspondent whose report we have just heard, he is right in describing the military side of this operation. It was a success, of course, for the Ukrainian troops because they brought war to an area which had not known war for 80 years after World War II. This part of the border was supposed to be left intact by both Russia and Ukraine. That was the unannounced deal between Moscow and Kyiv. But a military victory may turn into a political defeat for the Ukrainian leadership because Mr. Zelensky is now losing his high moral position of a defender of the motherland. If before he would say that we're just defending ourselves from the Russian onslaught, now people in Ukraine may question themselves, what is he doing? Why is he trying to take Russian territory? Historically, there was no situation when Ukraine would rule Russia. There were a long period when Russia and Ukraine formed the same state with the capital in Moscow. That period continued for 400 years. So when Russia came to Ukraine saying that you are threatening us, you are becoming dangerous, so de-weaponize yourself, denazify yourself, that was some kind of a model for the future. People had lived with Russia in Ukraine. Most of the people there remember the time when we were together, and many people have good memories about it. But Mr. Zelensky's move into Kursk, it is clear that sooner or later the Ukrainian army would leave this territory. But it is already devastated. 75,000 people had to quit their homes. So now the Russian society may finally lose patience and start a real people's war against Ukraine. Let me remind you that the war in Chechnya was not developing in Russia's favor until the Chechens started these so-called raids into the Russian territory, when they were committing terrorist acts, taking hostages. Probably some of our viewers still remember the names of Basayev and Raduev. So when such raids happened, and they were successful, by the way, the Russian society mobilized itself, and the Chechen separatists were crushed.
Okay.
So I think this is very much like the situation between India and Pakistan. If India gets really angry, everyone understands that it can crush the enemy. So Mr. Zelensky is playing with fire now.
Mr. Babic, let me come in here and read a statement by President Putin. Before I ask you this next question, Mr. Putin has actually reacted to what is happening in Kursk. He says, and I'll read part of his statement, "It is becoming obvious and clear now why the Kyiv regime had refused our proposals to return to a peaceful settlement plan. So it looks like the enemy seeks to improve its negotiating positions in the future." With that being said, what does Russia seek to gain from capturing Kursk or winning the battle of that region?
I'm sorry, Kursk is in the Russian hands. It's Ukraine who is attacking the region, and the Ukrainians have taken about 5% of the territory of the Kursk region. So it's actually not a very huge invasion. You know, it is uncomparable with the Russian invasion, when our troops almost reached Kiev. Kursk is a Russian city, an important one, and that's why this is still an important event psychologically, this attack by the Ukrainian troops. But I think our president is right. Zelensky, he gets his orders from the United States. And for Americans as outsiders, it may look like a good deal. Let Ukrainians take some Russian territory, then Russians would exchange it for Crimea or for Donbass. But this is a very American view, a view of an outsider. These people do not understand. In Russia, this attack is perceived as an attack against the people. There is not going to be any exchange of territories. The invading Ukrainian army simply will be crushed because Russia is much stronger. Yes, Ukrainians get Western weapons, but even with Western weapons, if you have a utopian idea devoid of any logic of how you will develop your so-called attack, then you will lose because let me remind you, war is a continuation of politics. If you do not have a sound political plan, war is senseless. So there is no plan behind this attack by the Ukrainians. They will not be able to control Kursk.
Mr. Babic, if you say that, then let me ask you this, and please be brief with your response. There has been talk of a possible peace talk that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has supported. China has recently acted as a mediator and has cautioned both of escalating the conflict. Question is, who will Russia or President Putin listen to? Is he even for any peace talk or resolution?
Well, I'm afraid after this attack, there will be no peace talks. Russia was ready for them in the beginning of the conflict. Even now, Putin suggested basically, if Ukraine acknowledges losing 4 regions, we will satisfy ourselves with that. Now, after this attack against the Kursk region, there will be no peace talks in the foreseeable future. And that's why I agree with the Chinese newspapers, I think it was Global Times, who wrote that this attack, in fact, destroyed another hope for peace. I think the Chinese sincerely wanted to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. They suggested an idealistic but well-intentioned plan of negotiations. Now, after this attack, negotiations will be postponed for another few years, at least.
Okay.
And I'm afraid both President Putin and President Zelensky will stay in power for a very long time, because Zelensky has full support of the West, and Putin considers that this is the goal of his life, to resolve the Ukrainian problem for the Russian country, for the Russian state. So these are bad news for everyone, what's happening now in Kursk, to my mind.
All right, we have to end it there. We are out of time. Thank you very much for talking to us. I've been talking to Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst, Russian international news agency Sputnik. Mr. Babich, thank you.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.